Good morning. My name is Ben Stireman. I'm already screwing up, guys. Deputy Director of the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. So I was asked today to talk to you about our update to our Great Salt Lake Comprehensive Management Plan and our Mineral Leasing Plan updates and the management of the berm and the causeway. I've got a lot of slides, so I'm going to move fast and happy to talk through any of it at lunch. So Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, we manage forestry, wildfire, and sovereign lands for the state of Utah. That includes Bear Lake, Bear River, Great Salt Lake, Jordan River, Utah Lake, and Green and Colorado rivers. We are updating the comprehensive management plan because the last time we updated that was in 2013, and a lot has happened since then. Those are just a few headlines, but we've also learned a lot since then. So how do we update these plans? First, we start with public input, and then we end with public input. So to begin, we did stakeholder meetings in each of the counties surrounding Great Salt Lake. We also hosted an online stakeholder meeting where we answered questions, tried to understand what was important to the public and our key stakeholders. And then we also created surveys to ask folks what's important to them. Not only what topics are important, but are there certain locations that we really need to be mindful of, or maybe areas where there's issues that people have identified. So now we're into the point where we're working with our key stakeholders like water rights, water resources, wildlife, some of our agency partners and other special interests to get the technical information, incorporate what we've learned in that time frame, and then produce a draft. And then we'll put it back out to the public for more input and then incorporate that. We hope to have the draft finished this summer and adopted by the end of the year or early next year. So what the CMPs do are they give us the guiding principles for how we manage sovereign lands, mainly as we manage them under public trust. We clarify allowable uses on sovereign lands, and then we provide, in this version, we're going to attempt to provide additional transparency about how we manage those sovereign lands as well. And what they don't do is we don't duplicate the work of other agencies. This is not a plan about how we're going to get water to the lake. There's a lot of folks working on that, as you heard from Laura. The basin plan covers that, and then also our plans are relatively focused on Great Salt Lake proper. So we're not going to tell people when to release water. We're going to continue the great work of the trust and the commissioner's office and others to help see water to the lake and conservation efforts. As I mentioned, there's a lot of collaboration involved in these. There's a lot of plans. You just heard from our first two speakers that the basin plan, the distribution plan, and a lot of other plans touch Great Salt Lake. So we're going to also try to incorporate what we're learning there and link to those so we don't have to tell their story for them, but we also can keep those things alive and well. Normally when we update our plans, we're slapping a coat of paint on it. In this case, we're actually taking it right down to the studs and we're kind of starting fresh. So I'll give you a little bit of a teaser on how we're doing that. So excuse me, we used to have what a lot of folks kind of referred to as like a NEPA style document or a book report. It was like 400 pages, and the second it got printed, it became outdated. So instead of having that NEPA document, we're trying to slim this down to less than 100 pages. There's still going to be something you can print and hold if that's your style, but we're also going to develop an online tool. So if you want to know, what our division is doing when the lake's at 4193 as opposed to 4190, you can go find that. We'll also try to update that as we go. So there's certain things we can't just update as we learn new items. We'd have to go back through the whole planning process. So we're trying to segregate those things, which I think will create a more durable plan. And in the long run, it'll allow us to keep those things alive and well and updated. But also next time in 10 years when we come to update this, we're really only updating the small portion of the plan, and then everything else will have been updated along that way. So the modern tool, like I said, will provide some visualization and also help folks that do want to use sovereign lands know exactly what they can use or do on those sovereign lands. Here's some land use management classifications. This is an example of something that will be fairly static, that will be in the printed document. So this kind of tells you what's allowable and not allowable on sovereign lands. So if it's not allowable, it means that our planning team got together and we said that's probably not a good use for sovereign lands in that land use classification. If it is allowable, it means that we think that the impacts are minimal. And if it's potentially allowable, it means that we need to do further investigation, and we'll likely work with other agency partners and folks that have expertise to help us decide whether that's an appropriate use of sovereign lands. Here's a survey. If you want, I'm going to link up to one more QR code at the end that'll have all of these on there. But if you want to see how we've classified those lands right now, you can go on there and look at that. And it kind of looks something like this. So you'll be able to click the map and it'll tell you what types of uses we've contemplated, whether allowable or not allowable. If you think we messed up, I want to hear from you now. Don't wait till we do the official draft, ideally we get almost no comments when we publish the draft, and we address these now during this time frame. So please visit that if you haven't already and give us your feedback. You also all probably know about the Great Salt Lake Elevation Matrix. It's the subject of our public trust lawsuit and benchmarking elevations. This is an incredibly hard tool to continue to develop as we're in active litigation. But the way that we have decided to work this is not really a scorecard for the lake. What we want to educate folks on with this is more about what we're doing to manage. It helps our people know what type of things they need to be considering when they're managing, and also what level of intervention we need when there is an issue. So I'll use one great example that I'm going to touch on later, which is salinity. So we know that salinity can crash the entire ecosystem. In 2022, when we were hitting historic lows, that was well on its way. We were hitting about 185 grams per liter as it relates to salinity. However, now we have this tool, the Berm, that I'll talk about in a moment here, which we're able to export salt to the North Arm, and we're getting really good at that. We know how to keep salinity right in the range of where it should be. Also, dredging of marinas. I mean, if you look at the matrix, you'll say, man, at 4190, gets really hard to boat on the lake, but we're able to dredge marinas. So there's things that we can do to offset that. So really this is kind of a way to talk about, like, what does that intervention look like? Are there things that we can't intervene on that we need to develop or understand better? And so this will help do that. So we've also put out a draft on our website. You can scan this QR code or the one at the end and go take a look at what we've done. It is different than the old matrix, and it's been updated. We've also added a lot of citations for how we concluded these. So again, I'll have this at the end. The website, again, we're looking at water, land, air, biology, people, economics. This isn't just our plan. We're linking out to other plans. So again, when you come here, you're going to be able to see how does biology relate to this specific thing, and you'll be able to look at that, look at the different divisions or agencies that are managing that, and then see what's important and how we're reacting to that. And again, we're going to be looking at trends, and you'll be able to see more about what we are doing on the ground, so you can have an insight and a little better transparency into what we do. Again, visit our website. This will be updated regularly, so you can get the elevation matrix, the land use classifications, and then future meetings as we're putting things out there. This will be the place to get it. So if there's one QR code to scan, this is the one. All right, so for the berm, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the salinity and why it's important. So the Salinity Committee developed this matrix because we wanted to plagiarize the cool matrix that was developed in 2013. But more or less, we wanted to also kind of get an idea of, like, what is the range we want to manage for. And what we decided or determined was we want to be somewhere between about 120 to 160 grams per liter in the fall. So this kind of sets up that target. I also plagiarized this from the Division of Wildlife Resources, but this is also the food web for Great Salt Lake, and this kind of depicts why salinity is also important. It pretty much touches anything that lives on Great Salt Lake and really sends home why we need to manage that salinity. So how do we manage salinity? So all of you that are here, I think you all know about the causeway. It started as a trestle-wood causeway and ended up as a rockfill causeway. That basically effectively created two different lakes. We have the North Arm that has no inflows, there's inflows, but all the main tributaries are coming into the South Arm, so very little inflowing into the North Arm. And then the South Arm, which receives the bulk of those inflows. Salinity the transfer of brines used to happen between two culverts or several culverts in the causeway. Those culverts began to sink. So in 2016, the Union Pacific Causeway decided they needed to do something different. They worked with the Army Corps and they opened up this breach. They had to keep the salinity within a certain range for 5 years. They were able to do that, but just by the skin of their teeth. And then we also just so happened to be crashing on lake levels. Salinity was going up. We really needed to do something more. And the way the agreement worked was that it said, if the state ever goes in and touches it, we have to manage this thing forever. So it was a really hard decision to make, but ultimately it was the right decision. The first time we raised it, we actually just raised it just to about 4187. It kind of acted like a speed bump, so the dense North Arm brines couldn't flow back into the South Arm. It was great. It stopped salinity rise in its tracks, but we continued to lower on lake levels. So later on that year, actually the next winter, we decided to raise the berm again, but this time we raised it all the way up to block all inflows. The idea being this time we would allow that to better mix so we could meaningfully export as much salt as we needed to the next year, lowering that berm. So that's what we did. You can kind of see the trends here. In 2022, 2022, 23, excuse me, you see the salt mass of the south arm just plummet. And that's a great thing. We're right about where we want to be right now at 120 grams per liter. One other thing that we've developed is this isomass plot. I got to give USGS a shout out. Christine Rumsey on our Salinity committee has really been the brains behind this. But what this isomass plot does is instead of focusing on values like concentrations, 120 to 160 grams per liter, we're thinking more about how the salinity, water volume, and the salt mass play together. So at any given elevation, we know about where we want to be, and then that means that we can then manage that berm to export or import salt based on where we want to be. Because I have extra time, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the Salinity Committee just voted on. So we had a meeting last Tuesday, and the Salinity Committee has made a recommendation back to Forestry, Fire and State Lands, and to Water Quality to lower the berm. What we found is that we've gotten really good at exporting salt, but if the lake is going to come up, we need to be able to bring salt back. We also are starting to see that there's some unintended consequences of the berm, nutrients being one of the primary issues. So the north arm essentially functioned as a source of nutrients to the south arm. John will probably talk about this, so I won't go too far into it, I think, but it basically, the brine shrimp need those nutrients. So now we're focusing on this kind of three-dimensional berm management. We need to get rid of salt, we need to bring nutrients back. We think that there's a way that we can kind of buffer these and get a load back into the south arm and then plan for the next year. We've received some additional flexibility legislatively about how and when we can manage the berm. And so this is something we're going to test our ability to bring it back and then look at what the future brings. But right now, our goal is going to be to bring nutrients and salt mass back, and then we'll revisit that again in November and see if we need to raise the berm or look at even exporting salt again. That's all I have for you. Thank you.